There is a persistent myth that the world's most elite soldiers have somehow transcended fear, that through selection, training, and repeated exposure to violence, they have become something other than human, that walking into near certain death leaves them unmoved, their hearts steady, their minds clear, as if evolution had built them differently from the rest of us. But this understanding is fundamentally wrong, and believing it blinds us to what actually separates these operators from everyone else. Delta Force operators feel fear. They feel it before missions. They feel it during firefights. They feel it when stepping off helicopters into unknown darkness, when breaching doors that might hide anything, when making decisions that could end their lives or the lives of their teammates. The difference is not that fear has vanished. The difference is that fear no longer controls them. It no longer dictates their decisions, paralyzes their movement, or clouds their judgment. Understanding how this transformation occurs requires us to look past Hollywood narratives and examine the actual psychological architecture built inside these individuals. Society has constructed an image of the elite warrior as someone fundamentally different from ordinary people. We imagine them as fearless, almost mechanical in their ability to face death without hesitation. This mythology serves a purpose, creating heroes we can admire from a distance, but it bears little resemblance to reality. Real Delta Force operators are not fearless. They are afraid, sometimes intensely so. But they have developed something far more valuable than the absence of fear. What they possess is the ability to function despite fear, to make complex decisions while their bodies scream warnings, to maintain tactical precision when every instinct urges them to flee or freeze. Panic, not fear itself, is the true enemy. Panic collapses decision-making, narrows vision, destroys coordination. Delta's selection and training do not eliminate fear. They eliminate the space between feeling fear and being controlled by it. They build a buffer, a psychological firewall that allows rational thought to operate even when the nervous system is flooded with alarm signals. When a human being encounters genuine mortal danger, the brain undergoes radical changes. Perception narrows into tunnel vision, focusing obsessively on the immediate threat, while peripheral awareness collapses. Time distorts, seconds stretching into something elastic and unreliable. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for complex reasoning and planning, becomes suppressed as more primitive survival systems take control. This is not weakness. This is evolution's emergency protocol, optimized for fleeing predators on ancient savannas, not for room-clearing operations in hostile territory. Under extreme stress, untrained individuals revert to instinct. They freeze, or they run, or they lash out without strategy. Higher-level thinking dissolves, replaced by crude fight-or-flight responses that served our ancestors but prove inadequate in modern combat. The problem Delta Force must solve is not removing fear from this equation. The problem is maintaining access to trained, deliberate responses when the brain is actively trying to shut down everything except raw survival instinct. This requires rewiring not just behavior, but the fundamental relationship between threat perception and cognitive function. Delta Force selection is infamous for its physical brutality, but the physical challenges serve a deeper purpose. They are not primarily testing strength or endurance. They are testing psychological durability under conditions designed to induce helplessness, confusion, and despair. Candidates are given impossible tasks with inadequate information, pushed beyond exhaustion, placed in scenarios where there are no right answers. The goal is not to see who can endure pain. The goal is to see who maintains decision-making capacity when every external support has been stripped away. Many candidates who fail are physically capable of completing the challenges. What they lack is the particular cognitive architecture Delta requires. Some freeze when overwhelmed. Some become paralyzed by overthinking, unable to act without certainty.
Some require external motivation or clear hierarchical guidance to function. The selection process identifies individuals who possess an almost irrational persistence, who continue problem-solving when problem-solving appears futile, who remain psychologically flexible when circumstances become chaotic. This filtering happens before serious training even begins, removing those whose relationship with fear and stress is fundamentally incompatible with the unit's requirements. After selection, training begins the process of transforming fear from a controlling force into background noise. The methodology is brutally simple. Expose operators to the situations they will face over and over until those situations lose their power to shock. Gunfire, explosions, confined spaces, darkness, exhaustion, uncertainty. All of these are introduced not once, but hundreds of times until the novelty bleeds away and familiarity takes its place. The nervous system learns that these stimuli, while uncomfortable, are survivable.
This is not desensitization in the clinical sense. Operators do not become numb. They remain acutely aware of danger, their senses heightened rather than dulled. What changes is the emotional response that accompanies awareness. When a situation has been rehearsed extensively, the brain has existing pathways to follow. There is less cognitive load spent on processing the shock of the experience, leaving more resources available for decision-making. Fear remains present, but it becomes familiar fear, expected fear, fear that occupies a known space in consciousness rather than overwhelming it. The training does not remove uncertainty from future missions, but it removes the panic that comes from facing something completely unknown. One of the most critical cognitive shifts Delta operators undergo is learning to focus on process rather than outcome. In high-risk situations, thinking about consequences, particularly death, actually increases panic and decreases performance. The mind becomes occupied with catastrophic projections, running disaster scenarios, contemplating non-existence. This thought pattern consumes mental resources and generates emotional noise that interferes with action. Delta training aggressively redirects this tendency. Operators are taught to narrow their focus to immediate, actionable tasks. Not, I might die breaching this door, but check my sector, control my breathing, move to position, execute the breach. The mission becomes a sequence of discrete actions, each manageable, each within the operator's control. This cognitive discipline is not natural. It requires constant reinforcement because the human mind naturally jumps to outcomes, especially deadly ones. But by training attention to remain on the process, operators create a mental environment where fear has less room to expand. They are not ignoring death, they are refusing to let thoughts about death occupy space needed for staying alive. From an outside perspective, many Delta Force operations appear suicidal. The risks seem wildly disproportionate to any rational calculation of survival. A civilian looking at the mission parameters might conclude that accepting such assignments requires either insanity or a death wish. But this perspective misunderstands how operators evaluate risk. What appears suicidal externally looks different when viewed through the lens of training, preparation, and capability. Delta operators do not see missions as coin flips between life and death. They see probabilities shifted by variables they control. The quality of intelligence, the precision of planning, the hours of rehearsal that have made every movement automatic, the trust they have in teammates whose capabilities they know intimately, the equipment designed specifically for this purpose, the backup plans and contingencies built into every operation. Civilian observers see the raw danger. Operators see the infrastructure of survival they have built around that danger. The mission is not suicidal if you have genuine reasons to believe you can succeed, and Delta's entire existence is built on creating those reasons. There is a paradox at the heart of Delta's psychological preparation. Operators must accept death before they can stop fearing it. This is not morbid obsession or fatalism.
It is a deliberate mental stance, taken before missions, that removes the largest source of panic from the equation. When death remains an abstract horror, something desperately avoided, it retains enormous psychological power. Every dangerous moment becomes a negotiation with mortality, a frantic internal dialogue about whether this is the moment everything ends. Delta operators undergo a different process. They confront the reality of death, acknowledge its possibility, and make peace with it before stepping into the mission. This acceptance does not mean they want to die or have become reckless. It means they have removed the element of desperate denial that creates panic. When you have already accepted the worst possible outcome, your mind stops running from it. Fear loses its sharpest edge because the thing you fear has already been acknowledged and integrated. This creates psychological space for clearer thinking, for calculated risk-taking, for the kind of calm that looks like fearlessness but is actually something more sophisticated. The psychological adaptations that allow Delta Force operators to function in extreme danger have consequences. Building a mind capable of accepting death, of functioning despite fear, of maintaining process focus under catastrophic stress, these changes leave marks. Many operators struggle when they transition back to civilian life, finding that the mental frameworks that saved them in combat create distance from normal human experience. The ability to suppress fear responses does not switch off when the mission ends. Relationships suffer when emotional regulation has been honed to an extreme degree. Normal stresses seem trivial, yet somehow remain difficult to navigate because the coping mechanisms developed for combat do not translate to domestic life. The acceptance of death that provides armor in war can create a detachment that others find disturbing. This mindset is situational, built for specific environments, but it does not remain neatly contained. The cost of becoming someone who can walk into suicidal missions without panic is often becoming someone who no longer fits comfortably anywhere else. This is rarely discussed in public narratives about elite forces, but it is as real as any other aspect of their training. Delta Force operators are not fearless. They have not transcended the biological realities that make humans afraid when facing death. What they have achieved is something more nuanced and in many ways more impressive than simple fearlessness. They have restructured their relationship with fear, transforming it from a controlling force into information their minds can process without being overwhelmed. They feel fear before dangerous missions. They feel it during firefights and extractions and all the moments where death becomes a present possibility. But that fear does not lead them. It does not make their decisions. It does not freeze their movement or cloud their judgment. Through selection that filters for specific cognitive traits, through training that makes horror familiar, through mental disciplines that focus on process over outcome, and through acceptance that removes denial from the equation, they have built psychological architecture that allows rational thought to persist when rational thought should be impossible. This is why they no longer fear missions that would seem suicidal to outsiders, why their emotional responses appear different from normal people, why they can face death repeatedly without being controlled by the prospect. Fear still exists in them. It simply no longer leads.